All right, let's dive into inspirational leadership in streaming. For those of you hungry for those aha moments, those sparks to fuel your own leadership journey, we've got some juicy material to unpack today.
You bet. We're digging into a really lively LinkedIn discussion, all started by Chris Redmond.
Oh, Chris Redmond, the founder of the OT Tread streaming community. I've heard of him.
That's the one. And the really interesting part is he's on a mission to make his podcast, the OT Tread Spotlight, even better, like Netflix-grade quality, he calls it.
Netflix grade for a podcast, huh? That's got to be high production value, gripping stories really make you think.
Exactly. He wants to go beyond the surface, uncover the stories behind success, not just the highlights. He's looking for some seriously inspiring CXO leaders to feature in the next season.
So kind of like a dope dive into the minds of those who've made it, the how and the why behind their success.
That's the idea. And to kick things off, he asked his network for nominations. And let me tell you, the comment section exploded. There are some amazing names in there, and each one highlights different aspects of what makes a leader truly inspirational.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's hear about some of these nominees.
One that stood out was Dominique Delporte. Remember that quote, "Content is king, but delivery is queen," from a 2017 speech.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. At first I thought, okay, that's pretty obvious. But then it hit me how relevant it still is, maybe even more so today.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Having amazing content is essential, sure.
Yeah.
But if people can't easily access it and enjoy it, then what's the point?
Right, we're in a totally different streaming world now with so many platforms and devices and ways to watch.
Exactly. So delivery becomes this huge factor involving the user experience, the tech behind it all, even how algorithms personalize what we see.
Wow, so Delport was kind of predicting the future of streaming with that quote. It's not just about great shows anymore, it's about building that whole ecosystem that delivers the content seamlessly to the right audience.
And that's the mark of a true leader, isn't it?
Yeah.
They don't just react to the present. They anticipate the future. And that's why Delport resonated with so many people.
Okay, that makes sense. Who else is on this list of inspirational figures?
Well, another name that came up was Dan Goman.
Dan Goman rings a bell.
He was praised for his pioneering work in OTT way back in the early days and his innovative thinking.
Ah, so he's one of the OGs of streaming. He wasn't just along for the ride, he was shaping the industry as it emerged.
Exactly. That takes vision, courage, a willingness to experiment and take risks.
So if Delport represents strategic mastery of delivery, Goman embodies that entrepreneurial spirit. Makes you realize there's no single mold for an inspirational leader.
That's what's so fascinating about exploring these different examples.
Yeah.
It really opens up your perspective on what leadership can look like. It raises a good question. What does success even mean in streaming? Is it subscriber count, revenue, critical acclaim, cultural impact, or something else entirely?
Probably a mix of all of that, right? Which makes leadership even tougher. You're balancing artistic vision with the business side of things, and then you've got to keep up with viewers who are constantly changing what they want.
It's a complex dance, that's for sure. And that's why I think Chris Redmond is so interested in the behind-the-scenes story. He wants to uncover the wisdom gained from those journeys, the struggles and triumphs, which can be incredibly valuable to those of us looking to lead.
So it's not just about celebrating success, but understanding the path that led there. Speaking of journeys, Chris recently had Rachelle Peterson on his podcast. She's an expert in B2B OTT, business-to-business streaming. He even mentioned it has massive revenue potential, but often flies under the radar.
Yeah, B2B streaming is a whole other world compared to what we usually think of. We're so used to Netflix and Disney Plus that we forget about streaming in hotels, restaurants, corporate settings.
Oh, wow, I never even considered that. Peterson's work definitely opens up a whole new perspective. And Chris said she covered some really interesting stuff in the episode, like the challenges of acquiring content for B2B, tailoring the user experience for those different environments, and how the travel industry plays a role in engagement.
Right. Think about it. Hotels want to provide streaming in their rooms to make guests happy. Restaurants might use streaming for background music or those interactive dining experiences. Then you have corporate offices needing platforms for training or internal communication. It's totally different from just chilling on your couch and watching a show.
It makes you wonder why we don't hear more about B2B streaming. Maybe it's just not as flashy as those big blockbuster series or viral hits. But it's obviously a huge part of the industry, and Peterson is a leading voice in that space.
Absolutely. And her success highlights another key aspect of leadership, identifying and seizing those emerging opportunities. The B2B market was wide open, and she saw the potential carved out her niche as a thought leader and innovator.
So she's not just riding the wave, she's helping to create it. And speaking of thought leaders, Chris also interviewed Lydia Fairfax recently. He described her as confidently vulnerable, a trait he's noticed in many successful individuals.
Hmm. That's a really interesting observation. It seems like Fairfax embodies a blend of strength and authenticity.
Hmm.
She's not afraid to be open about her challenges and vulnerabilities, which actually makes her more relatable and human.
That's so true. It's like she's saying, hey, I'm just like you. I make mistakes, I have doubts, but I also have the courage to chase my dreams. That kind of authenticity can be really powerful.
Absolutely. It breaks down that image of the infallible leader, which can be so intimidating. Fairfax's approach feels more human-centered, more grounded in the realities of leadership in this complex, ever-changing world.
This is so relevant to anyone who wants to be a leader. It shows there's no single right way to do it. Strength and vulnerability can coexist, and being genuine, showing your true self, can be a powerful way to connect with and inspire others.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a valuable lesson for us all.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to be this superhero leader, always perfect and in control. There's space to be human, to show your real self.
Exactly. And that ties in perfectly with this whole shift we're seeing in the streaming landscape, becoming more democratized. It's opening up so many new opportunities for leadership to emerge from unexpected places.
Makes me think of the creator economy, which Chris Redman is clearly excited about. He's got that OT Tread Creator Week event coming up with Ankur Mehra and Evan Shapiro, remember?
Oh, yeah. And it's not just some passing fad either. The creator economy is changing the game, like how content is made and consumed. It's giving individuals the power to build their own platforms, connect with their audiences.
So kind of like mini CXOs building their own little empires, right?
Hmm.
Based on their unique talents and what they're passionate about.
Exactly. They're often incredibly driven, and they really understand their niche audiences, what people want. And this connects back to what we were talking about with the need for more diverse leadership styles and more inclusive representation.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like these creators are often coming from backgrounds or communities that traditional media might have overlooked.
Right. Think about it. For so long, those gatekeepers in traditional media had all the control. They decided who got to tell their stories and how those stories were told. The creator economy is disrupting that, making space for more voices, more perspectives.
It's like a power shift, and I'm really curious to see where this takes the streaming industry in the long run. But while we're on the topic of representation, Chris also shared some interesting thoughts on LinkedIn about broader industry trends. I remember one post where he talked about an Ipsos poll that showed concerns about representation in media.
Oh yeah, that one. It highlighted how certain groups, particularly men, LGBT Americans, people with disabilities, and Asian Americans, felt like they weren't being represented fairly in the media.
Right, and he was asking these thought-provoking questions like, how does this impact content production? Is the rise of the creator economy fueled, at least in part, by people wanting to see more authentic representation?
Exactly. It makes you wonder if viewers are gravitating towards streaming platforms or creators who better reflect their own identities and experiences. Like if you don't see yourself in mainstream media, you're going to be more drawn to content that feels real, relatable.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like Chris is saying, pay attention to this because it's shaping the future of the industry. It's not just about being politically correct. It's about understanding how viewers are changing, what they expect to see. They want representation both on screen and behind the scenes.
And that's where inspirational leadership comes in, right? It's
Yep.
about recognizing these shifts, not just as market trends, but as societal values.
Hmm.
It's about creating content that's not just entertaining, but also meaningful, inclusive, and representative of the diverse world we live in.
Okay, so we've explored Chris Redman's search for inspirational CXO leaders for his podcast. We've talked about the qualities and achievements of the nominees, and we've even touched on some broader industry trends. But instead of just focusing on Chris and his network, I think it's time to turn the spotlight on you, our listener. We've heard from them, but now it's your turn. Based on what we've discussed, who would you add to this list of inspirational CXO leaders in streaming?
Yeah, who comes to mind for you? And more importantly, why do you find them inspiring? This is where your perspective comes in.
Maybe it's someone pushing the boundaries of technology or championing a new way of creating content. Or maybe it's someone who's leading the charge for greater diversity and inclusion.
Or maybe it's someone working behind the scenes, making a difference in a way that's not as visible but just as important. The possibilities are endless.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting. We're not just passively listening, we're actively thinking, engaging with the ideas, and making them our own. So take a moment and think about it. Who is an inspirational CXO leader in the streaming space, in your opinion? What about them stands out to you?
Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Leadership comes in many forms, and inspiration can be found in the most unexpected places. Once you've identified someone who inspires you, really consider why. What is it about their leadership style, their values, or their accomplishments that resonates with you?
By understanding what inspires us, we can gain valuable insights into our own goals and aspirations. So let's wrap up this part of our deep dive with a little challenge for you. Think about that inspiring CXO leader you've identified. Now imagine you had the opportunity to interview them on Chris Redman's podcast. What questions would you ask? What would you want to learn from their experiences?
It's like you're creating your own masterclass in leadership, getting to pick the lessons you want to learn directly from someone who's been there and done that. It's like stepping into the interviewer's shoes for a moment. What would you ask them? What stories would you want to hear?
Yeah, like designing your own leadership masterclass, getting those insights straight from the source, someone who's actually walked the path.
Right, and just by thinking about those questions, you're not just listening anymore, you're actively connecting the dots, relating it all back to your own goals.
It could even spark ideas for your own career, Maybe there are mentorship opportunities you hadn't thought of or ways to collaborate that could really boost your leadership skills.
Yeah. And remember, you don't need a podcast to have those conversations. Reach out. Connect with those who inspire you.
It's all about turning that inspiration into action. Who knows what those connections might lead to?
Exactly. This whole deep dive has been about shining a light on those inspiring figures in the streaming world. But it's also about igniting something within you, our listener.
Maybe it's sparked a new interest or giving you a fresh perspective on leadership. Or maybe it's just fired up your passion for this amazing industry.
And here's a final thought, building on what Chris Redman started. What if the most inspirational CXO leader in streaming is you? Just a few steps down the road.
Ooh, I love that. Full circle moment.
Think about it. What kind of leader do you want to be? What impact do you want to have on the industry? What will your legacy be?
Those are some powerful questions to consider. It's not just about reaching that C-suite level. It's about defining success for yourself on your own terms and then charting your own course.
So keep exploring, keep learning, keep connecting.
And until next time, keep diving deep.